I'm going to be brief. Imagine that, a politician being brief. But I know you've got a bunch of questions, and I just want to make a few remarks from the Democratic majority. As Nick mentioned, I live in northern Westchester, so I have a slightly different perspective than some of my colleagues do. I pay a lot of property taxes, like all of you. My business is tied to the land, so we're very sensitive to the property tax issue. And I am committed, as is the Democratic caucus, to reducing the size and the cost of county government. That's been my personal philosophy since I was elected, and since I was selected to be majority leader last year. That's the message that has come out of the Democratic majority. We need to reduce the size and the cost of county government and make it leaner and make it smarter and still provide the vital services that the people of Westchester County rely on. As a business community, what do you want from government? First and foremost, you want stability. And you've got that in Westchester County. You've heard that from Ken, you've heard that from Jim. We are a functional legislature, unlike Albany perhaps, or Washington. We work very well together. We may have disagreements on policy in the committee room, but we work very closely together. We sit together, we work together, our staff sit together. As majority leader, I sat with the Republicans for a year because that's how we roll, that's how we operate. And the government itself is stable. This is a AAA rated county. This year we had a $54 million surplus. You know, we hear lots of talks about deficits. It's important to know that this year we had a $54 million surplus. And I think differences with the county executive and the legislature have been overblown. Agreements don't sell newspapers, with all due respect to my friends in the Fourth Estate. You know, neither do press releases that say, Harckham and Maisano agree on X. You know, that's not going to get a lot of play even on page 10. We, as a legislature and as a Democratic caucus, we share the goal with the county executive to reduce the size and the cost of this government. On that, there is no disagreement. We may disagree on the means on occasion, but that is the system of checks and balances. But I think it's important to understand what we have done together. And a lot of that has been discussed, but I just want to reiterate that so we know how far together we've come. We reduced the workforce by 10%, and that was something that we did as a legislature and the administrative branch. We did that together. You heard a lot about the contributions to health care. One proposal was made by the county executive. We thought it was good, but we thought it could be fair and save more money. And that's what we did on the legislature. We put in the sliding scale. It was fair, and we saved more money. And again, we reached the same ends, but we had a different approach on the means. But we got to where we all wanted to be. We cut sick days that people could take with them. We cut that in half. That was something that we all agreed on. We moved quickly on, and we got that done. We reduced spending in this last budget. That was really important for everybody. We reduced spending by $30 million, and that equates to 6% on the tax levy. So if we had left spending at last year's levels, that would have been a 6% tax increase. So not only did we save 2.2% in reductions for taxpayers, there was an additional 6% that we cut in the $30 million in spending. You know, and a lot was played up about the vetoes, the overrides. There's a lot of sturm and drang about that. But do you know what the reality of the net difference in all of that noise was? 0.2% of the entire budget. That's how close we were. 0.2% of the entire budget. So what it was an agreement on the means and a slight disagreement on how we got there. And some of those priorities were important to the business community. Things like public safety. I met with one of my police chiefs up in Bedford last night, and he said, thank you for restoring the cuts to labs and research, because that's essential to police investigations and criminal prosecution. And if you look at what's happening in Nassau County now, hundreds and hundreds of cases and convictions could possibly be overturned because of problems in their criminal lab. Why? Because they cut funding year after year after year. That's an essential service for all of us in Westchester, but certainly you in the business community. The other thing that I think we should take note of is we, both the legislature and the administration working together, are a year ahead of schedule on the housing settlement. A lot of noise has been made about the housing settlement with HUD and the Justice Department. We are a year ahead of schedule. We were supposed to have 100 units approved and funded by the end of this year. We had them approved and funded by the end of last year. So again, that doesn't make a lot of headlines because it's not conflict, but that's something that we've done together, and we should all be very, very proud of that. There are a lot of other things that we do that, again, don't necessarily make big headlines, but we've done them together in a bipartisan fashion. Things like flood legislation. You know, that's something that impacts you in the business community, certainly. It impacts all of our residents. We passed that unanimously, and that was something we did with the administration and the minority caucus and the majority. Recycling, something that I sponsored last year. Starting in June of this year, we're increasing the plastics that we recycle. We used to just do 1 and 2s, now we're going up to 7. And aside from the environmental benefits, because that can be sold, it's going to generate additional revenue for the county, and it's going to reduce the cost to homeowners and businesses for their carting fees. So that's another positive thing. But again, we don't get a lot of press on that. It's a shame that Jimmy left because we had bipartisan consensus on one of his bills, which was a social host law. There's a loophole in state law about adults who host parties where alcohol is served. And Jimmy's legislation closed that loop. And again, we did that in a bipartisan fashion. My DWI vehicle forfeiture bill, one of the toughest in the country. Democrats and Republicans joined together to pass that to make Westchester safer. So starting this year, if someone's convicted of DWI and they've been arrested by a county officer, the county will take action to seize that vehicle. And we saw in Portland, Oregon, cases of recidivism went down 50%. And why is that important to you as taxpayers? Because you pay for probation. That's the single largest caseload in our probation department. 23% are second-time DWI offenders. That comes directly out of your property taxes. Not to mention police overtime, court costs, all of the above. That's going to save all of us money, and we did that working together. The ag district. That's a business incentive that makes agricultural business more accessible and friendly in northern Westchester. We have 17 new applications in the short time that we did that. Again, that's attracting agribusiness to Westchester County. That's another good thing, but we don't hear a lot about that. And again, we did that working together. Public-private partnerships, things that we're working on. You hear a lot about Playland, and obviously that's one public-private partnership. We agree with the administration on that. There's a small park in my district called Mearstead. It's an old historical site. We're working with the administration and Copeland House, a not-for-profit music center over in Cortland, to turn that into a musical residence and retreat. And there's a very profitable concert series that's going on there. These are the kind of public-private partnerships we're working on, but you don't necessarily hear about because there's no Sturm and Drang involved. Just a couple of quick final things to touch on what Jim and what Ken were talking about. One is the mandate relief. If we really want to talk about meaningful property tax reduction, and we all do, the county executive was talking 1, we were talking 2. Those are efforts in the right direction, but we're still nibbling around the edges. We could reduce everybody's property tax in this room 40% tomorrow if New York State funded Medicaid the way all other 49 states do. New York is the only state in the country that funds 25% of its Medicaid allotment through county local property taxes. So when we want to talk about mandate relief and meaningful property tax relief, I think that's where we need, as a legislature, as an administration, and as the business community, we need to speak with a single voice to Albany. Get your act together, reform Medicaid now. The last thing, I just want to touch on Jimmy's comments about Section 8, because it's certainly not that simple. And I don't think you should be waiting to hear about it in the press because, again, that's not where we solve problems. We solve problems in the committee room, as the chairman mentioned. And the reason Section 8 was in the budget was a very complex but meaningful policy decision, because over the years, all of Westchester County municipalities, many of them had their own Section 8 offices. And they came to the county to centralize those so we could have one intake, one handling. It was easier for landlords so that they weren't dealing with 23 different Section 8 agencies. We're dealing with a federally mandated housing settlement that dealt with, that deals with housing mobility. That's the crux of the lawsuit. So we felt as a legislature that that was a vital service that we needed to maintain. And because it was in the Budget Act is a law. You just can't decide whether you're a Republican or a Democrat what laws that you're going to obey and what laws you're not going to obey. So when somebody doesn't obey something that's in the Budget Act, that's something that's taken seriously. And we as a legislature need to have a very serious discussion about that. And it shouldn't be on the front pages of the newspaper. And I'm not going to tell you what way we're going to go because we haven't had that discussion yet. People have their personal opinions, but on Monday we're going to have a meeting with all 17 legislators, and we're going to sit around a table and we're going to see how we want to deal with that. So we shouldn't be spouting at breakfast and on the front page of the paper how we're going to settle lawsuits, because that's not how business is done and that's not how the legal process works. But I am here to tell you that as a legislature and someone who's concerned about checks and balances, when a law is not enforced or enacted, all of us should take that very seriously, whether we're Democrats or Republicans. So in closing, I just want to thank you all. We need this dialogue. I'm very accessible. If anybody wants to reach me, you can always call me, as Ken said, breakfast, lunch, dinner, coffee, because we represent you. That's the beauty of the legislature. We all represent 55,000 people. Like you, I'm a business owner, a small business owner. And what happens in government impacts all of us, and we take that very seriously. So we look forward to your questions, and thank you very much for having me.